Hello, everyone. My name is Reed-Arzavala Reed, and I'll be discussing post-traumatic growth following the Oklahoma City bombing. An overview of what I'll be talking about. I'll identify the thesis, discuss terrorism, the Oklahoma City bombing specifically, aftermath for survivors, family, and community, struggles and recovery, the media's role, avoiding re-traumatization, and future research suggestions. So the discussion thesis is post-traumatic growth for Oklahomans following the Oklahoma City bombing can minimize re-traumatization from the media coverage in the years following the attack. Terrorism. Most people think of September 11th. Terrorism affects large numbers of people in just a few moments, leaving a wake of destruction for a lifetime, eliciting fear in most people. These acts require time, skillful planning, and usually a group of people with common goals. Terrorist acts of violence elicit anticipated victimization that initiates widespread anxiety and costly efforts to mitigate vulnerabilities. Similar to September 11th, most people know exactly where they were at the time of a tragedy such as the Oklahoma City bombing. According to Troy 2023, terrorism that originates in subjective perceptions of victimhood, injustice, and feelings of resentment give rise to further violence, making this an extremely important topic. Why did I choose this topic? Due to the large-scale destruction that happens in a matter of seconds, the lifetime effects that it has on everyone involved. I love this message of teaching empathy rather than hate. Terrorism is definitely born from hate. And so if we had more empathy in this world, maybe we would all get along a little bit better and have less violence. And I have a personal stake in this. It will be 30 years in April since the Oklahoma City bombing happened. At the time I was 10 years old, my dad was stationed at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma City. And we knew some people who were personally affected by this, including us. I want to honor all of those who died, including the first responders, but this woman, Rebecca Anderson, was my 5th grade classmate's mother. She was not in the building at the time of the bombing, but a nurse who left the safety of her home to help and save others. She lost her life when a part of the building fell on her and killed her. At 10 years old, my classmate lost his mother while we were sitting at the elementary school 8.5 miles from the bombing site. So the Oklahoma bombing specifics. On Wednesday morning, April 19th, 1995, at 9 a.m. in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols concealed a bomb inside a moving truck near the entrance of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. The explosion killed 168 people, including 19 children, and injured hundreds more. At 9:02, the 4,000 pounds of TNT caused destruction, resulting in an economic loss of $652 million from a force that damaged over 300 buildings, was felt up to 55 miles away, and registered a 6.0 on the Richter scale, causing almost a third of this building to collapse. According to Kushner 2023, terrorism was now on everyone's radar, from the military to local law enforcement. This was the first and worst act of domestic terrorism, only to be surpassed by 9/11. Terrorism was now also an interest to academics and all outlets that published their work. "16 days following the bombing consisted of round-the-clock response and recovery efforts. A member of the recovery team spray-painted 'Bless the Children and the Innocent' on a concrete remnant of the building, which became known as the memorial slab. It was at this slab first responders gathered before entering the building and again at ending their shift. Over these 16 days, uncertainty and instability spread across the world. Family members were unsure if their loved ones were stuck in the building alive, at the hospital, or dead. A sense of uncertainty, shock, confusion, panic were instilled in the local community, only to be drawn out for those 16 days of unknown and unanswered prayers. Some of the survivors even passed away due to the complications of their injuries in the weeks to follow. This is where many people started to question, why God? How could this happen? The death tolls continue to increase and bodies continue to be recovered. When a community mourns, media coverage tends to spread the inner devastation to the rest of the world, initiating movements for support. Overwhelming media presence sometimes spreads inaccurate information, invading privacy, and not respecting boundaries, which can lead to re-traumatization of the victims and survivors. Careful consideration and respect should be given to prevent re-traumatization, as these survivors have been through enough pain, and invading their privacy does not benefit the rest of the world in any way, shape, or form. Watching media coverage is not technically a form of trauma exposure, though it has been described and treated as such across numerous studies, which taken together reveal an association with post-traumatic stress outcomes and media coverage. Media coverage is central to fulfilling terrorist goals of generating fear and intimidation in the general public, which a community event could be incorporated into emotional lives and personal narratives of those who had no direct or indirect interpersonal connection to the event. So meaning that people all the way across the world felt the pain, the empathy, the struggles of Oklahoma City and Oklahomans. Collective traumatization. Media showed the entire world round-the-clock coverage of the damage and recovery efforts. Night and day efforts were extended for those 16 days following the bombing, locating not only survivors, but remains. The continuous coverage of the aftermath of the bombing also spread awareness of terrorism to the United States, but also spread fear and uncertainty as well. According to Betty 2020, excessive bombing-related television viewing leads to increased rates of PTSD, especially in children. Children and adolescents face the greatest risk of suffering the detrimental effects of these hostilities, as they must navigate the normal challenges of developmental growth while being exposed to an environment of insecurity and violence, heightening their vulnerability and susceptibility. According to Casa et al. 2022, adolescence is formative, in which growth, development, maturity, and habits form, including potentially dangerous lifelong habits, can be developed. The world's reaction. The entire world stepped up to show support and love to Oklahoma City. With the media's help, the shared fear, uncertainty, empathy, and grief spread far beyond one local community. The support and efforts from strangers and first responders was far-reaching. The construction safety fence surrounding the building and debris became a place where community members and visitors to gather to show their support and pay respects. With the help of social media, survivors and families were able to receive love and support from total strangers all the way across the world. Moving on to survivors. For bombing survivors, all areas of life were disrupted. Many were hospitalized due to their injuries. Workplaces were damaged or destroyed. Children lost their parents or friends. Media reminders were daily, and funerals preceded the 16 days following the bombing. Survivors in the building worked together to survive, asking each other if they were okay and to help remove rubble off of their coworkers. Many survivors, after successfully escaping the danger, selflessly returned back into the scene of destruction to help others. Some narratives described survivors were endlessly tortured by regret over not having helped more survivors escape the scene of the building. One survivor perseverated over his self-perceived responsibility for coworkers trapped in the Murrah building and unrelenting guilt over having failed to return and to save them. Concerns about what they might have left undone at the scene played heavily over some survivors, as the what-if scenarios replayed in their minds. One survivor asked, "Why are people so cruel and hurt innocent victims?" These survivors attended many funerals over 16 days following the bombing, including 2 people who had attended more than 15 funerals. I want to also note the pictures here. The one on the left is the tree that was damaged. It was right in front of the Murrah building. It was damaged. It looks almost dead. And then the one on the right is the same tree all of these years later. That's known as the survivor tree. It is, again, another iconic photo or picture of resilience, growth, and healing. This tree is located at the center of the memorial, which I will talk about a little bit later. First responders. Emergency responders during and after traumatic events can experience particularly strong stress reactions based on personal factors such as current life stressors, amount of work stress prior to the traumatic event, how much sleep they've gotten, how many hours they had been on call currently, and resilience factors. Recovering the bodies of 19 children was particularly hard for all first responders, as innocent children should never have to deal with such pain and suffering. Fire Captain Chris Fields recalled how hard it was to hold the body of Bailey Allman, who had just turned 1 year old the day before, while he has a 2-year-old baby at home. This is that picture of Chris Fields holding Bailey Allman's lifeless body. According to Melanie Eversley of USA Today, she said this was the iconic photo of him holding Bailey Allman's lifeless body, which captured the essence of one of America's most dramatic tragedies of that decade. This photo symbolizes pain and tragedy, but also resilience. Without resilience, first responders and trauma survivors would struggle to heal following tragedy. Resilience factors include strong support system, high self-worth, training and education, personal history, faith in God, and current stress factors. According to Wittenberg 2024, evidence of American exceptionalism was the first responders coming together to risk their lives in support of a heroic cause that exemplified resilience and empathy in the face of hardship. For Oklahomans, daily routines were disrupted, and work and school and normal daily functioning felt secondary to trauma recovery and emotional survival. Survivors struggled with health concerns, hospitalization, burns, scars internal and external, grief, and even displacement from their workplaces. Many surrounding buildings were damaged, leaving people without a workplace to go to or going to work facing the reality of their lost coworkers, loved ones, and the debris left behind. To quote the words of Reverend Billy Graham, spoken during the statewide prayer service the Sunday following the bombing, which was that Wednesday, "The spirit of this city and this nation will not be defeated. Our deeply rooted faith sustains us." These words are also etched around the survivor tree at the Oklahoma City National Memorial. Media's role in coverage. According to Betty 2020, extensive media coverage following the bombing added to distress and prolonged recovery, complicating the grieving process and acceptance of the losses. While some communal reactions like support and comfort were positive, the social attention and media coverage constituted an invasion of privacy that disrupted the recovery process for some of the bereaved. This is especially true for Bailey Allman's mother, who said that she was known everywhere she went, and so many people were checking on her in attempts to support her, but it actually just reminded her daily that her baby was no longer here. Making sense of senselessness. In attempts to heal following a traumatic event, people try and make sense of the senselessness. Identification of particularly vulnerable groups struggling to cope might most benefit from some intensive interventions and therapy to reduce or prevent long-lasting effects of trauma symptoms, especially in children. For children and teenagers dealing with such intense emotions, it's like taking on adult-like duties and challenges without having yet acquired the skills and cognitive maturity of adulthood to do so. This is yet another factor that complicates the healing and the growth. On May 23rd, 1995, the Murrah building was demolished. This triggered many feelings for many people. It was essentially reliving the memories all over again. It was a second bomb blast, so people felt it for, I'm sure, up to those 55 miles away, which, of course, it triggered intense feelings that reminded them of the original bombing. But bringing the building down allowed that visual reminder to be removed and allowed The space for rebuilding. The inspirational Bless the Children and the Innocent on the temporary memorial slab was a heartwarming reminder of the city banding together to overcome pain. Now, after the rubble has been cleared, brainstorming for a proper memorial can begin. Healing. Survivors typically struggle with all kinds of emotions: feeling out of control, emotional regulation, self-soothing, anger, blame, acceptance, forgiveness, communication, healthy boundaries, trust, intimacy, relationships, family, emotional safety, decision-making, confidence, and trusting oneself. These are the things that will have to be addressed in order to properly heal and move forward. So in order to heal, survivors must reprocess the trauma and the emotions associated with such in the safety of usually a therapist's office or with trusted loved ones. They must re-examine their self-worth, relationships, and create healthy boundaries. Not all wounds can be seen. The obvious ones are physical scarring, burns, injury, and loss of limbs. Many people, after the Oklahoma City bombing, develop breathing conditions from inhaling the dust and debris for hours or days of being trapped. Beyond the physical symptoms, of course, are the emotional scars. Following a terrorist attack causes internal and external conflicts, which can lead to developing PTSD. We all know pretty much PTSD, so I won't talk too much about it, but I do want to cover a couple things. PTSD is characterized by an exposure to an event that fractures an individual's sense of safety and challenges the maximum capacity for coping. These symptoms generally include vivid memories, intrusions, self-harm, substance abuse, negative self-image, emotional dysregulation, nightmares, isolation, social withdrawal, and suicide ideation. According to Gray 2024, PTSD symptoms occur more after an event resulting from human negligence, incompetence, or malicious intent, which could have been avoided, rather than actual injuries themselves, which I found very interesting. Typically, after an event like this, people struggle with their faith. Many people ask, why does God allow children and innocent people to be killed? This is an example of a crisis of faith. Some of the Psalms contain prayers of suffering people convinced that their suffering is a punishment for the sins that they have committed. In the wake of tragedy, hopelessness and despair set in, causing an existential concern of why me? While these answers will never truly be answered, by turning the pain over to God, healing can then take place. According to King James Bible, therefore, having faith provides peace. Another type of struggle is moral injury, which refers to the loss of trust in oneself, leaders, and systems during crises, especially by making critical decisions based on resource availability rather than ethical principles or best practices. This generally is for first responders who can't save everyone, and they start to question, even though there's logical reasons, why can I save this person but not this person? Emotionally, they have a really hard time connecting those two thoughts and coming to terms with it. Religious coping is used as an interpretation of any stressful event in the context of God's intention for the traumatic event. For example, is this God's punishment or abandonment, which would be negative religious coping, versus God has a greater purpose for growth and healing, which is positive religious coping. According to Gray et al. 2024, negative religious coping was a strong predictor of serious PTSD symptomology, more serious than being injured in the blast. Positive religious coping narratives have been found to be associated with improved outcomes during therapeutic intervention, suggesting the integration of positive elements into disaster According to Gray et al. 2024, negative religious coping was a strong predictor of serious PTSD symptomology, more serious than being injured in the blast. Positive religious coping narratives have been found to be associated with improved outcomes during therapeutic interventions, suggesting that integrating positive elements into disaster narratives may help protect individuals against detrimental reactions to trauma. Faith and love wins. Resilience is born in a world with so much suffering. Faith and spirituality are mechanisms that facilitate survival, recovery, and resilience to establish or renew a relationship with God and find meaning and purpose in disaster. Faith in a higher power promotes peace and comfort where there was once pain and loneliness. In the darkness, as life is slipping away, God brings warmth and love to heal the worst pains. According to the King James Bible, we also glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, and perseverance, character, and character, hope. Complex or complicated grieving consists of persistent feelings of longing and yearning, intrusive thoughts, and problems functioning at school or work. According to Pierce 2020, the way people grieve has changed since the rise of social media and online avenues. An act that was once done mostly in private is now a display for followers to view, support, and remember the dead. With survivors and family posting memories, feelings, and updates online for the world to see, emotional support can come from all across the world. Treatment for trauma and PTSD. Typically, we examine resilience factors. To date, most evidence treatments for PTSD and trauma is cognitive behavioral therapy and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is EMDR. So I'll cover CBT and EMDR. Most treatments conceptualize trauma and PTSD as resulting from fear-generated disruptions in memory organization of the trauma and alterations in belief systems and perceptions. Most of us know what CBT is, so I won't cover too much of it, but it's essentially cognitive restructuring paired with behavioral modification. So cognitive distortions equal distorted viewpoints equal distorted reality. Therapy's intent is to bring awareness and change so that we can replace unhealthy behaviors with healthier ones. An EMDR therapist facilitates a natural and intrinsic healing process using bilateral stimulation where the client can reprocess past painful experiences within the safety of the present, usually the therapist's office. The bilateral stimulation is usually light or finger or tapping, to my understanding. According to Clotter, cognitive behavioral therapy and EMDR are the most effective treatments for PTSD and CPTSD, which we covered last week, with an impressive healing rate of 40 to 50%. Therapists can gain proper knowledge, training, and skills to work with every kind of client suffering from all kinds of trauma backgrounds and symptoms to avoid re-traumatizing the clients. Group therapy is particularly effective with first responders, mostly because the fear of judgment, that you can help more people at the same time. There's a lot of validity in everyone else's shared similar experiences, and there's less pressure. So it's not one-on-one and they're forced to talk and they don't know what to talk about, but there's a group of you. So sometimes if you're not feeling up to talking, having other people in the room can take some of that pressure away and make it a little bit more conducive to healing, growth, and communication. Medication management should be used in combination with talk therapy, but particularly can be very helpful with intrusive thoughts, dissociation, and nightmares. Rebuilding. Initially at the base of the memorial slab, first responders left pictures, plaques, and personal items found in the rubble. Visitors and community members also added flags and flowers to the perimeter fence to offer support and comfort. This slab was the first impromptu memorial and suggested there should be a permanent memorial created to honor the memory of those who were killed, those who survived, the first responders, and everyone changed who was changed forever. Memorial groundbreaking, construction, and dedication took place in the fall of 1998. Once the ground was broken to begin construction for this outdoor symbolic memorial, followed by moving the fence, which had become very meaningful over time, it was very emotional to many families and survivors as the earth was turned. But this allowed giving the piece of property to the world to come here to remember. This site was never meant to be a cemetery. All 168 people killed have a grave marker, but this site was meant to be a public place of remembrance, to come and learn the senselessness of violence and for people around the world to remember. This is a list of all 168 people who perished in the Oklahoma City bombing. I wanted to touch on a couple of them. I highlighted my classmate's mother, of course. I highlighted the 2 Tinker Air Force Base airmen that perished. My dad worked on Tinker Air Force Base, and so he personally knew these 2 women, one of which had just gotten married just a few weeks before, and she went to the federal building to change her last name to her new last name and died. There I highlighted 2 children, a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. They were brothers, so unfortunately 2 parents lost both of their children in just the matter of seconds. And then I highlighted some pregnant women that I thought was particularly sad, that so close to their due dates and their babies will never be born. So lots of grief, lots of mourning. And I want to also note that this was an Air Force base. And so it had people from all over the world, people from Texas, Alabama, California. I'm sure there are many others. And so this wasn't specific just to Oklahoma City. This was all over. The Memorial and Museum. The memorial was dedicated and opened April 19, 2000. It was on the 5th anniversary of the bombing. It was built on time and within budget. And now, almost 30 years later, thousands continue to come to the site to remember and to learn. In light of this disaster, Oklahoma City created a memorial and museum, not only to honor those who died, but also to highlight the altruistic character of Oklahoma citizens in the moments following the attack. The Oklahoma City National Monument and Memorial mobilizes the effect of trauma in idealizing Oklahoma citizens who have overcome tragedy to establish a cathartic resolution to terrorism. This memorial falls into the style of post 9/11 era of public memory by utilizing themes of heroism and sacrifice to restore pride and provide comfort. Oklahoma citizens exemplify resilience and American exceptionalism. This form of resiliency is known as national unification. Perseverance and endurance are a psychological coping mechanism for coping with the magnitude of tragedy while preparing for vulnerabilities to come. Carrie Watkins is the manager of the Oklahoma City Memorial and Museum, stated, "Evil may have had its moments, but together we will define every moment that comes after." The memorial's purpose. We come here to remember those who were killed, those who survived, and those changed forever. May all who leave here know the impact of violence. May this memorial offer comfort, strength, peace, hope, and serenity. According to Carrie Watkins, this is our important work. We can never quit teaching the horror of this story, but we must also show the hope that transcended the horror. As we look at history, we must teach remembrance and why it is important so we don't continue to repeat the same patterns. Oklahoma now holds an important responsibilities as cities and organizations around the world that follow in dealing with a tragic community event such as this will turn to our city a memorial museum for help and comfort. The memorial mission statement commands us to teach the brutality of the attack, but also the tenderness of the response. Without places of public memory, society would lose important aspects of history that bind publics together. Many sites of commemoration invite the affective experience of melancholy, a deep type of depression or mourning in which people stay attached to what they have lost. Where this space is meant to utilize heroic acts of victims immediately following the blast, to symbolically define the idealized Oklahoma citizen, a citizen who would risk under insurmountable duress their own safety and well-being to help colleagues and children that they have never met. So following a tragedy like this, we want to grow and move forward. And so usually the first step is to advocate for change. Following a tragedy, a mission to regain a sense of control and comfort begins. The fight for a greater purpose involves advocating for change and future safety for others. Following the Oklahoma City bombing, building structures and standards were evaluated. The safety of structures against accidents and blast loads became an important social issue, which demanded structural resistance to impact and blast loads, which has since increased. Also, I want to make note that they blocked off a lot of access to the entrances of military and federal buildings so that nothing like this could ever happen again. In many cases, they blocked off the whole street. So you can't even drive in front of one of these kinds of buildings. To try and reduce further trauma to survivors following Timothy McVeigh's conviction and death sentence, President Clinton signed into a law, Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act, designed to speed up death penalty appeals and hasten executions. So all of these things are in an attempt to learn from previous mistakes and prevent anything like this from happening ever again. Trial and media coverage. The overwhelming media presence can lead to re-traumatizing victims and survivors in the years following the Oklahoma City bombing and constant media coverage and reminders. In 1997, Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh were tried and convicted of the Oklahoma City bombing. Nichols was sentenced to life in prison while McVeigh was sentenced to death. In 2001, when Timothy McVeigh was put to death by lethal injection, a perceived order was restored and justice was served, creating a collective healing and closure for all. Oklahoma City bombing researchers found that post-traumatic stress was associated with greater bombing-related television viewing, especially during the intensive media coverage of the criminal trials and the execution. So the whole point of this presentation is to maintain healing and growth and avoid re-traumatization as much as possible following every single one of these reminders. According to Simha Alpern, 2007, mentalization or reflective functioning, which can also be known as emotional intelligence, is defined as the ability to observe, understand, and label one's own emotional state, including physiological and affective cues, as well as understand the relationship between one's behavior and internal state. The ability to self-regulate is to manage impulse control and self-monitoring. By enhancing self-reflective capabilities, identifying and regulating emotions can become second nature. And so that is what every trauma survivor should aim for, is to become emotionally intelligent so that they can help themselves. But in the events that they can't, for whatever reason, they also need to be able to ask others for help, advocate for themselves, practice the coping skills that they've learned, maintain and utilize their support systems effectively, process any new feelings that come up with every single one of these reminders, and most importantly, do not repeat old patterns. Future trauma research. A study by Tucker et al. 2024 identified greater autonomic reactivity in direct survivors of terrorism 7 years later. Of note, spouses and Oklahoma City bombing survivors and children of the victims had higher autonomic reactivity and cortisol levels than community control groups. This is 7 years post Oklahoma City bombing. So again, just the 7 years, we need more. Cultural differences. I didn't find a single thing on cultural differences. So does culture change how trauma is perceived or overcome? And does the culture of the perpetrator change how trauma is perceived or overcome? I would love to have some more information on that. And last, types of traumatization. How do the different kinds of trauma change the long term reaction? So, natural disaster versus crime versus accidents. The one study made it very clear that man made disasters caused a lot more internal struggles with people and emotional harm than natural disasters. But again, where does religious coping come into play here? There's a lot of things that are vastly understudied. According to Hutal et al. 2024, the relationship between event centrality and the dimensions of traumatic stress, intrusions, avoidance, and hyperarousal have been vastly understudied. So these are my references. I appreciate your time. I hope you all learned a lot. And I hope you take away that healing and growth is particularly important to sustain a healthy, happy lifestyle. And I hope we all appreciate what we have. Thank you.